Hi again, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to talk today a little bit. This is kind of a bonus video about the chapters we read in Rosenhaus, and I think you guys are going to like this because I'm going to show you some historic pictures of the places that Dr. Rosenhaus talked about, and I'm also going to intersperse it with some video clips that I have recorded recently of those places as they look today. So stick with me here, and we'll get done with this as quick as possible. So the first place that we're going to look at is going to be this old beauty right here. This is an old postcard of the Willis Overland Factory Complex, complete with the assembly buildings that went around, the bridges that went over the roads and railroads carrying goods between the different parts of the factory, and Central Avenue up front. Now, what remains of this factory? Not much. Really, only one thing that you're going to see right now. You guys all know where I am right now, right? This is the big Overland smokestack just off I-75. It's the only remaining part of Toledo's most famous factory, the Jeep Parkway facility. This place was built for automobile production in 1910, and they built Jeeps here during the war. And up until the new Jeep plant was built way up 75 in 280 in 2006, they made cars here for 96 years, which is kind of crazy. And it's a huge part of Toledo's identity and Toledo's history. And so, like I said in the video, the really cool thing here is that we've only got this one piece of this factory left that had been around since 1910. The oldest parts of the factory date back to, I believe, 1906. But it had been building cars since 1910, and it's just amazing to think that cars were produced for nearly a century in that facility. So this is what it looked like in the 1910s and 20s. This is what it looked like during the war. This building, I think, is one of Toledo's greatest lost treasures. This is the Willis Overland Administration Building that was right on Central Avenue. There are some pretty famous pictures of Jeeps driving up the front stairs there as the Jeeps were released during the war. You had this giant sign that lit up with light bulbs that I think just must have been fantastic to see. And boy, if I had a time machine, that's one of the places I'd love to see. Not maybe in my top 25, but top 200 for sure. This is a map of it. So when you saw me in the video, I was standing right there at the middle of that traffic circle where the great Overland stack is. And over here is historic Woodlawn Cemetery, which I highly recommend you guys get a tour of sometime. We'll definitely have some videos with me popping up there over the course of the World War II class and a lot in the Toledo history class, because it's just a fabulous, fabulous place. These are sites of other factories that were around Toledo during World War II, and you see that they were kind of scattered all over the place. Almost every neighborhood in town had a major manufacturer that was making stuff for the war effort. One of the most important Toledoans that we saw in this reading was Brand Whitlock, the former mayor of Toledo. And this is a photograph of him on the deck of a ship. I believe this photograph was on the ship on his way to Belgium to become the U.S. ambassador to Belgium, but I cannot swear to that. This map here, if you notice anything about it, if we were in class, I'd be interactively with you like, what do you see here? Tell me what you see in this map. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it. Look at this map. Think about what you see. And is there anything unusual? Is there anything that you're like, oh, okay, that might be interesting? We're obviously looking at a map of Toledo. It's from the 1930s. Maumee River runs right up the middle of the city. East side over here. Downtown is in white. And then we have neighborhoods that are different colors, right? I want you to think for a second about things we talked about in class and things that Dr. Rosenhaus had in the book. Which neighborhoods here do you think were the neighborhoods that they would only sell land to African American families in? And hopefully you guys remember what that word was, and it was redlining. These are the redlining maps. This is the actual redlining map for Toledo, Ohio. And in the book, if you guys remember reading about William Thomas, William Niger Thomas, who was born down in Georgia. His family came up to Hamilton Street at the end of what had been called Cushvans, and then became known as the Pinewood Edition for a while. And then after that, the Pinewood Edition was almost always known as the Dorr Street Corridor. This is Toledo's historic African-American neighborhood. Right at the center here. I lost my cursor. Right here is Toledo's historic African-American neighborhood, just southwest of downtown along like Avondale, Nebraska, Indiana Avenue, etc. And of course Pinewood and Dorr Street. Then you also had African-American neighborhoods kind of ringing the north edges of here's kind of the old North End, north of downtown, and then getting up towards Bayview Park. So this would be like Manhattan. I think this is like Manhattan Avenue up here. And then this would be up, golly, I think this is up south of Woodward, maybe around the Forest Cemetery possibly. And then on the east side, you've got the neighborhood that goes towards Oakdale, and then another neighborhood that was tucked in back over here, back kind of near the refineries today. So that's the redlining map of Toledo. Sorry to kind of take a lot of time there. This beautiful building right here, take a deep look at this, and especially kind of look at the windows and the roof line. This is the Libby Owens Ford plant out East Broadway near Oakdale. Oakdale School is right across from this. East Broadway School is just off to the side here. And in a little video, you'll see that it doesn't look that different today. So this, guys, is the Libby Owens Ford facility in 2020. As you can see, I am right across the road from Oakdale Elementary over there. And this is the former LOF facility. And this is the part that's in the old picture that I'm going to show you. Remember that the guy who ran this place was John David Biggers. And Biggers saved the company by focusing on one product, car windows with General Motors. That one contract proved what a shrewd operator he was, and it didn't go unnoticed. And as the war goes on, John D. Biggers is going to be one of the most important Toledoans in the history of World War II. All right, so again, match it up. You just saw it in the video. There's kind of the same windows. This is the old LOF. Okay, this room is another one I would love to go in sometime. This was the ballroom at the Commodore Perry Hotel. And it had, in Rosenhaus, we read about some of the different functions that were held here. One of the America First rallies was here. Some of the speakers who are going to warn about Hitler's rise in chapters 3 and 4 are going to speak here. This was a real gathering place for the people at Toledo. Kind of beautiful murals on the side, this awesome floor, good looking stage. They don't make them like this anymore, guys. All right, this building is still standing, and a lot of you have probably been to it. This is the Valentine Theater building. Now, the part of the building that we go in on today is over here. And that's not where people went into the Valentine back in the old days, because there was another building there. And that building's gone now, and that's where they built that atrium that's on the front of the on today's front of the Valentine Theater. Back in the day, you went in over here and over here. And there were shops all around the Valentine Theater. Now, down here, almost where my ear is, right there, there we go, is today's Toledo History Museum. And once the plague has passed us, I really encourage you guys to get to the Toledo History Museum. The volunteers there are wonderful. It's a great organization. I wish so badly that we could go there as a class right now. All right, this beautiful school is the second Woodward. Now, the first Woodward was down where the main library is. It was originally Toledo High School. Then when Scott and Waite opened, it became Woodward Technical School. Then when this building that you see in the picture here, the Woodward that existed from the 20s through the 2000s, if you have parents or grandparents who went to Woodward, this is the Woodward that they went to. Because when they opened this building and named it Woodward, the old building downtown just became Technical High School, and this became Woodward. And of course, today we have a new and even more beautiful Woodward out on Central Avenue. This is Libby High School. Libby, in my humble opinion, probably the greatest building that's ever been torn down in my lifetime. There were other great buildings like the Paramount Theater that got torn down before I was alive, but watching Libby die was painful for a historian. In some ways, this looks a lot like Scott and Waite. In other ways, it was different. You notice it's got those parapets at the top, like a castle, right? Like you can almost imagine archers taking cover behind these brick things up here. They had the big flagpole on top of the roof. And then it had, like Scott and Waite, the two wings that come off the sides, etc. This is DeVilbiss, still standing today, thank goodness. This is where Toledo Early College High School is, and still exists today. This picture here is taken from where the Docks restaurants are today. This is looking at the high-level bridge and the ships that all came in. And like when we talk about the Docks restaurants today, why are they called the Docks? Because it's where the docks used to be. And actually, I think this was a little upriver from the docks, perhaps the middle grounds. Here is another building you all know. This is University Hall at the University of Toledo. And UV Hall was one of those buildings they talked about all the construction boom in the Roaring 20s and going into the beginning of the Great Depression. Okay, this one I want you to take a good look at the photograph. In the book, we talk about the Hoovervilles, right? Rosenhaus talks about the Hoovervilles, and we come to understand that things that we've seen in movies like Cinderella Man didn't just happen in New York City. They happened in Toledo as well. And you see these shacks that were put together on this land that really wasn't owned by anyone near the river. And imagine when you've got a cold wind coming in, how terrible it must have been here. Now, this is what it looked like in about 1933. I'm going to show you what it looked like in August of 2020. September of 2020, just a week before we started school. Hey guys, I'm standing in East Toledo right now, and as you can hear, there's a little bit of wind blowing today. It's a warm August day when I'm recording this for you guys. Right behind me, you can see Waite High School. If you remember in the book, we read about Hoovervilles, the places during the Depression where people threw together shanties, and we talked about how there was one real close to the river. Well, I'm standing pretty close to where that Hooverville was right now. And if you look with me down here, it's the downtown skyline, and right behind me is the Maumee River. 90 years after the Great Depression, this is the place where people lived when times were as tough as they've ever been in Toledo, Ohio. And the warm wind that's hitting me today was a cold wind back then. The reason we care so much about this stuff in the Depression isn't because of what it meant then, but what it meant to the kids who grew up in it. Because those kids who grew up in these hard parts of the Depression are going to be the men and women who win the Second World for us. This was the site of the poorest place you could possibly imagine in the city of Toledo during the 1920s. 90 years later, this is one of the newest, most upscale neighborhoods in Toledo. All right, this building is one of my favorites. Now, take a look at it. See if you can identify it. I'm at the corner of Front and Consol Streets in East Toledo. Let's take a look at the video so you can know what it was today. I'm standing at that same angle, right across Front Street from Tony Pacco's. And the dogs are every bit as good today as they were in the Depression. Right? And you can kind of see how the windows are the same. You can see how the door on the front is in the same place, even though it's all spiffed up today. Still the same old Tony Pacco's, right? All right, this building here, for anybody my age, so probably for most of your parents, if your parents grew up in Toledo as well, when we think of the name Brand Whitlock, we're not thinking of the ambassador to Belgium most of the time during the critical World War I period. For people my age and older, we think of the Brand Whitlock homes. This was one of the first housing projects built in Toledo, and it was considered spectacular. If you look at this today, now, I know some people are going to look at this and go, oh, that's ugly architecture. It's just a bunch of rectangles, whatever. But like, I love looking at this set of buildings because when they were built, they were beautiful, I think. They were Art Deco, right? This is the 30s. This was the architecture of the 1930s. And it's got those clean lines across, the windows symmetrically set. These, the rest of the building is kind of recessed from the entryways. The Brand Whitlock homes were awesome when they opened up. And public housing was not seen as something to be ashamed of in the 1930s. It didn't have the stigma that it grew to have in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. Public housing was considered a human right, as I think you could probably argue it should be. And this was seen as a great step forward for America, and kind of the look of these apartments, how clean they were, how almost all of them had gardens and stuff. I think it kind of reflects that Americans did not see this as something to be ashamed of, or something for people who were somehow lesser than other people. America believed deeply in public housing. Okay, the Naval Armory. This is a web address. If you're ever bored, you can watch a clip of what the Naval Armory looked like when it was open, and it was pretty awesome. But I have a clip of what it looks like today, and I gotta be honest with you guys. If I had 10 million bucks, I would buy the Naval Armory outright today. I would rehabilitate it. I would live in it. I would buy a giant boat that I would dock next to it, and then I'd open up the rest of it as like the Toledo Historical Institute, and it would be a high school specifically geared towards history and humanities classes, because I think it's awesome. So take a look at what it looks like today and try not to cry. Okay, you guys, right behind me, out near Point Place, this is the old U.S. Naval Armory. It was a Naval Reserve Armory, and at the beginning of the war, it's where the Marines and the Naval Reserves from Toledo came, did their training, and then got shipped out to the coasts. During the war, it became a training station for storekeepers, telegraphers, and yeomen, and there were thousands and thousands of people who got trained through this building right here in Toledo. After the war is when the real action happens, I think. After the war, every sailor from Ohio, from Michigan, from Pennsylvania, from Indiana, every sailor who was getting discharged came through this building. They had graduations every single day where the guys got their paperwork, they got a flag, they got a handshake, they had a moment of silence for the fallen comrades, and they all came through this building right here in Toledo, Ohio. So yeah, the place looks pretty rough. The Naval Armory needs some work. All right, what we're looking at here is the front page from Toledo Newsbeat, one of 3 papers that existed in Toledo in the 1930s. You had the Newsbeat, the Blade, and the Toledo Times. And this is a picture of the Battle of Toledo, the labor struggle between ownership of Electric Autolite and the unions that were inside the building. And the fights at Autolite were epic. And I don't mean that in a good way. I mean it in the kind of classical sense of epic. And it really did lead to change. This was one of the big strikes during the Great Depression, during the New Deal era, that led to more protections for labor. And it was a tragic thing at the time. It had some great outcomes, including the fact that we even have such a thing as Labor Day today. All right, this guy here is Carl Joseph. Carl, you met in Chapter 1 briefly, and then in more depth, I think, in Rosenhaus's Chapter 2. And Carl is one of my favorite characters in the book, and Dr. Rosenhaus shared a lot of stuff with me about Carl Joseph and about what an amazing individual he was. This is him with one of his girlfriends. You remember, he was the guy whose parents were Syrian immigrants, probably from today's Lebanon. But they were, it could have been Lebanon, could have been Syria. I can't remember exactly which. Either way, Carl Joseph's family was from over in the Middle East, and they came here, and he said his parents were stuck in the New World, but he was totally a part of the New World. And we see that in this letter that Dr. Rosenhaus shared with me from a University of Toledo collection. This was written by Carl Joseph's English teacher at Wake High School to the Dean of Students at the University of Toledo, Dr. Carter. Carter hated Carl Joseph, and his English teacher, Mrs. Hall, writes this letter. And there's a couple of things here that I think are just really amazing. And she says, the result of our heart-to-heart talk was that he unburdened his mind to me, telling me of his difficulty with his parents, who were still in the old world in their ideas and ideals. He explained that a wide gap existed between them and him, for they were still living in Assyria, in thoughts and actions, while he was an American in every respect. And this is one of the things that I really want you guys to get out of this chapter. Toledo as we saw in chapters 1 and 2, Toledo was a city of immigrants. Make no mistake. But those immigrants, when they got here, nearly all of them tried very hard to be American, and every one of their kids saw themselves as an American. And in so many ways, without those immigrants and children of immigrants, World War II is not going to turn out the same way for the United States. These are the people I think you could very reasonably argue immigrants and children of immigrants were the people who won the war for us. And Carl Joseph is one of those guys for sure. He's going to go on to be a paratrooper, and we'll learn more about his adventures in the paratroopers and his adventures at the University of Toledo in future lessons. So I have a couple more videos to hit you guys with, so I'm going to hit to those. There's another Toledoan that you guys met in these early chapters, and that's Joey Brown. And if you guys remember, as a kid, Brown was a vaudeville performer and didn't think show business was going to work out for him. So he moved back to an apartment in this house, and he and his wife had a son named Don. And Don was almost certainly born across the street at Toledo Women's and Children's Hospital, which you guys today know is the Board of Education building for Toledo Public Schools. Joe E. Brown and Don Brown are going to be huge in the story that we talk about this semester. Joey Brown is probably Toledo's most prominent, important person involved in the war, and he does some things that are truly extraordinary over the course of the war. Okay, and with that, guys, thanks for watching this. I hope you got something out of it. I can tell you guys I had a ton of fun making these videos around the city of Toledo, and I'm looking forward to doing more of it with our class this year. Take care, you guys. Oh, and listen, guys, even with all of this, you're doing great.